If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm glad to be here with you today. For those of you who are new here, my name is Kathryn and I recovered from binge eating 18 years ago. Actually 18 years ago this month. And since then, it's been my mission to share what I've learned and to help as many people as possible escape the struggle with food. I also like to bring guests on the show who have overcome their own issues with binging and disordered eating because I think it's really useful to have unique perspectives and insights. My guest today is Kain, who has been on the show before back in episode 90, and we had a great conversation, and I'm really happy to have him back. Marcus is an anxiety, trauma, and binge-eating-informed personal trainer and nutrition coach. In today's episode, we're going to discuss the role of exercise during and after recovery. You'll learn why you need to be mindful of your fitness practices and when any sort of training may not be advised. We'll talk about how to approach fitness from a healthy perspective so that you don't reignite or perpetuate eating disordered behaviors. If you're someone who feels confused about fitness as you try to end binge eating, I think you'll find this conversation very practical and informative. Hi, Marcus. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, Kathryn. Thank you so much for having me.
It's so good to have you back. We're going to talk about a topic that's related to what we talked about last time. Last time you were here, we talked about letting go of unrealistic and unhealthy fitness standards. And we talked about some of the trends in the fitness industry and how that can be really harmful for people. So that was kind of about what not to do in relation to fitness. And today we're going to address kind of what you can do, because I know a lot of people out there are focused on health and do want to be healthy and do want to focus on fitness, but may have a lot of questions about, well, how does this fit into my recovery? Like actively trying to recover and then afterwards. So I'm looking forward to diving in today about that.
Yeah, it's a topic that I'm hugely passionate about. And yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on to chat about this, because there's a whole lot of really extreme opinions out there on this kind of thing. But, if we take a relatively sensible and somewhat intelligent approach to it, there's a path, through this. So yeah, definitely looking forward to chatting about this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely love your rational approach to things. I feel like you're never on the extreme end of any issue. And, I'd love to hear your opinion. So you've told a little bit of your story on the last episode, and I'll link that episode in the show description so people can learn more about you. But as far as this show, can you just explain what your expertise is as far as being a trainer and really a binge eating informed trainer?
Yeah. So after my own experiences with multiple eating disorders and trying to find my own way in the fitness industry, both as an enthusiast and a professional, after experiencing those things, I had to kind of fill in the gaps for myself and find my way, find a way to a better relationship with food and training. And I did that through whatever resources I could find for a while. And then in more recent years, I've had some more formal education, I guess you'd call it, in the field of, binge eating recovery specifically. So in the same way that when I was working in commercial gyms, I always wanted to solve difficult problems for people, because I always felt like there were a bunch of people who would come into the gym or come into any given space and, take to whatever was going on like a duck to water. They wouldn't have many obstacles and they'd just, get their result or get a good experience and be like, oh, cool, I guess this is me then. But then, other people would struggle and they would experience hurdles with, injuries and disordered eating and all that kind of stuff. And I noticed a lot of the other trainers in that space or in those spaces kind of turning their back on people who had problems that these trainers considered too complicated or too hard to deal with. And I didn't want to see those people fall through the cracks, because I was essentially one of those people. Like, I had obstacles, I had questions. So I made it a little personal mission of mine, I guess, to work with people in solving their most difficult problems, in getting over those really difficult hurdles, whether it be things with injuries. I don't work with injuries as much anymore, obviously, because I'm online rather than, in an actual gym. But yeah, whether that be injuries or disordered eating, and navigating the process of a great relationship with exercise after having experienced eating disorders.
I feel like what you do is so needed, because everyone who walks in the gym, we don't know who's going to end up going down this dangerous path as far as like body obsessions and food obsessions and losing weight in an unhealthy way and things like that. Like, we don't know who's going to end up going down that eating disordered path and who's just going to have great results and get stronger and meet their fitness goals. So yeah, like you're saying, you want to be there for the people who still want to focus on fitness, but when they do, they end up with problems. And I mean, I can relate to that for sure. I mean, as far as being a runner, like I look back and in my career in track, and I ran track in college, and it was just a complete disaster because I went down a dangerous path. I lost weight. I had stress fractures. And I often think, gosh, if I could have had someone like you or someone who was informed to help me through it, like what could I have accomplished? And we don't want people to give up on certain goals they have. So there's an intersection that I feel like, you're trying to bridge. And I hope that this conversation can help people with that.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think the gray area, or the kind of middle area, is often neglected with these things. Like, a lot of the people who come to me and work with me, they're often past some of what they might consider to be, or what were like the worst years of their eating disorder, or whatever they're experiencing in regards to disordered eating or that kind of thing. But they're still not quite at the point where they feel really confident and at peace and fulfilled and able to enjoy things in regards to exercise and, a basic approach to healthy nutrition that doesn't involve disordered eating. And there's this gap that's not currently being filled. And I try to live in that gap for people and help them bridge that space between recovery and what we could call, I don't know, totally fine again, because I see a lot of people come out of recovery programs and they're like, cool, I don't struggle with the worst of it anymore, but I'm not quite where I want to be, and I'm not quite sure how to make that happen. So I work with a lot of people in that situation and help them, like I said, bridge that gap.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think for some people, it can feel like a slippery slope. Like they don't feel quite healthy, and just one kind of wrong move down that food obsession path could lead them right back to binging. So yeah, really important to help people just feel more secure in their recovery, feel like their fitness is all within healthy limits, their eating is nourishing, and they're just feeling healthy overall. So I just want to dive into some questions kind of about how you handle this intersection between eating disorder recovery and fitness, like with your own clients and in your own life. So let's talk about someone who's early on in recovery, like really just realizing they have a problem. They want to try to tackle it. They're maybe binging, maybe struggling with some of the anorexia side too. And, in my opinion, it's really important to let go of these weight obsessions and really make sure you're eating enough. And as far as the people you work with, do you recommend like kind of giving up on fitness goals for a short time, or how do people handle it early on in recovery when maybe they still have this impulse toward fitness, but it's just very unhealthy?
The first thing is that everyone's journey is a little different. And of course, you know that as well as anyone. Like, you and I have had conversations about how everyone's journey is a little bit different, and how the combinations of things that work for different people can create a lot of variation in the different, I guess, formulas for success that we see. So a big part of it for any given person is going to be getting really, really honest for a start about what's driving you to make the choices that you're making in terms of fitness and exercise, because obviously for a while, at least, we need to put aside any form of exercise or movement or training that's really driven quite intensely by a desire to change our body size and shape it doesn't mean that we need to just sit on the couch and do nothing but eat nachos for 6 months and completely step away from all forms of exercise and everything. That's not it at all. But we need to be really honest with ourselves about why we're putting on our running shoes or why we're stepping into the gym, and see if we can be doing some of those things for reasons that are maybe a bit beyond size and shape. So that would be the first thing that I would recommend. Really get honest with yourself in terms of why you're doing what it is that you're doing, and let's see if we can maybe shift some of those things. A really great example that I heard at one point was a woman talking about how when she trains or exercises and goes to the gym now, she thinks about how much she enjoys going skiing with her family because they ski a lot. So a big thing for her was being okay, the fitter I am, the more confidently I can move my body, then the more capacity I have to enjoy this thing that I do with my family that means so much to us. So we really need to start working on, as a fundamental step, shifting the motivation behind exercise and looking at what's motivating us and how can we make that motivation a little bit more intrinsic, a little bit more I'm doing this because the act in itself is its own reward, rather than I'm doing this because I need to look a certain way or I need to fit myself into a certain image, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great point, just to be honest with yourself about the intention behind it.
That's it.
And if your intention behind it is a healthy one, like you mentioned, the woman with the skiing, if her intention is to be healthier and to enjoy an activity, she's then not going to turn around and punish herself in the gym and starve herself and not give herself enough calories. So if you're doing it in a self-caring way, then it's going to naturally be healthier, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It takes some time and some reflection to untie some of these knots. Obviously, so many of us have been exercising for so many years with that mindset of I'm doing this to burn calories or I'm doing this to change my body shape. And it can be almost a bit strange for some people. It can be a really weird experience to go, okay, if I'm not doing this to change my body shape, then why am I here? What am I doing? Mm-hmm. And it does very much affect the intensity with which we go after different things in the gym or in any given exercise session or training session. But ironically, when we remove I guess you'd call it that sense of urgency and desperation that often comes with feeling that need to change our body size and shape, ironically, we get better, more sustainable results because we're making decisions that are more emotionally balanced and better informed than when we're just approaching every session with the intent of exhausting ourselves as much as possible.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, having a more balanced approach to it, like you said, makes it more sustainable and actually gets you better results. But it's hard to kind of convince someone of that when they're in the mindset of, I have to punish myself as much as possible. I have to do as much as possible. It's not until you really step back and start changing the way you look at it that you actually see, oh, wow, there's another way to do this that actually feels so much better and helps me be the best version of my unique body that I can be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also I want to add here, and I know you would agree with this, a lot of it depends, let's say early on in recovery when you're struggling with some harmful behaviors and maybe your weight is in an unhealthy range. A lot of what you can do is also determined by you and your doctor and your health status at the time.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I know it goes without saying, but nothing that I'm suggesting or recommending here is any kind of substitute for medical advice. And, medical advice always has to come first. Whenever I work with someone, that's in my coaching agreement and everything like that it's whatever we do, it's down to your discretion. It's down to your doctor. I can guide, I can help navigate, I can make recommendations, but, medically, we need to make sure that you're safe.
Yeah. So everything we talk about that we have talked about so far and that we will talk about is assuming that you are medically safe and healthy enough for exercise.
100%. Yeah. Because obviously, there are some people who, might need to step away from exercise for a while. And this is where some of the really heated arguments, especially on social media, happen because there are some people who are in a dangerous position medically when it comes to eating disorders. And for some people, some time away from exercise is really important. But then there are other people who find that exercise and that kind of thing is really beneficial for their mental health and just helping them feel good through the process. So yeah, whatever we talk about here, it really comes down to the individual for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we kind of talked about your intention behind exercise as far as a measure of whether or not it falls into the category of a healthy habit or whether it falls into the category of an unhealthy obsession. And your intention a lot of times kind of determines which category it fits into. What other ways do you either help people bring exercise back into their lives during recovery or continue exercising like in a healthy way besides the intention behind it? What are some other sort of tips you give people in order to keep it in that category of being a healthy habit?
Sure. One of the things that I do my best to bring people's attention to is the fact that a lot of the information that we have and a lot of the habits that we've adopted in terms of our fitness and exercise practices come from the commercialization and the marketing side of the fitness industry rather than sports science. So there's that whole attitude and mentality surrounding commercial fitness that's just like, anyone who's been to a group exercise class would know that often when we go to a group exercise class, it's like the intention of the instructor to make everyone feel like they've had a really good workout. And how they do that is just by absolutely obliterating everyone in the class. Like it's not hard to find one of these classes that will just push you so hard that you want to, keel over and die at the end of the class. And there are a lot of sometimes young, sometimes unfortunately even, veteran trainers who still take that attitude into working with gym members and working with clients. That's, you need to get your money's worth. So I need to push you as hard as possible and make you feel like you've really gotten your money's worth out of this. But if we were to look at the principles of effective like strength and conditioning training, it's not really advantageous to just ruin yourself every time you have an opportunity to exercise. So I talk about things like maximum recoverable volume, for example, which is, a really common thing that's talked about in strength and conditioning, but, not talked about enough in terms of just the average person jumping on an exercise program or going to the gym. And maximum recoverable volume talks about the amount of physical work your body can do and then positively recover from. And that last bit is particularly important, that positively recover from. You have the capacity to do more physical work than your body can positively recover from. So what that means is you have the capacity to train so hard and exercise so hard that you will write yourself off for days at a time, and your body will be so focused on repairing and trying to get back to some semblance of equilibrium after that experience that you won't experience any positive adaptations from the exercise, because your body is just like, oh God, like I'm just trying to repair myself after that experience. Mm-hmm. But maximum recoverable volume talks about, well, there's going to be an amount of exercise that we can do or a range that we can fall in that doesn't completely drain our tank, but encourages our body to adapt in the positive way that we're looking for, whether that be get stronger, increase our endurance, increase agility, whatever it might be. So that's a distinction that I probably bore my clients with like way too much, that, often we base what we're doing on, does it feel like enough? Do I feel like I've trained enough? Do I feel this? Do I feel that? Well, that's a difficult one to go by. It's difficult to train intuitively when many of us have spent our whole lives listening to these messages from the fitness industry that's like, go hard or go home. There's no such thing as a bad workout. I'm telling you, there is.
Yeah.
It's possible to do too much. Like, so I do my best to bring people's attention to strength and conditioning principles rather than commercial fitness slogans.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think for people who do struggle with this and struggle with the body obsessions and the food obsessions, it can almost be harder to pull back in a workout and,
Yeah.
not push yourself to the limits. It can be harder to take a rest day. It can be harder to
Yeah.
let your body recover.
Absolutely. Actually, one of my clients at the moment who started working with me last year, she's telling me about how she's training more moderately now. She's doing a more sustainable volume of training, I guess you'd call it. But then all her devices, all her wearable tech, like her Apple Watch, her Peloton, all these kind of things, they're all saying, oh, you're doing less exercise than you used to. And it's like, well, she was overtraining potentially. Yeah. And these apps and this tech, like they're not taking that into account. They're just measuring, the calorie burn and the amount of time spent exercising. And then the only feedback they're giving to her right now is like, oh, you're exercising less. And so that's making it more challenging for her at times to really step into training and exercising an amount that is healthy and sustainable, because literally all of her tech, right down to her watch and her phone, are saying you're exercising less.
Wow.
And it's mad.
Yeah, it's based on this assumption that more is better when really more would actually lead to worse results down the road,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like working out smarter and not harder, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, more is not always better.
Mm-hmm. And I'm definitely learning that more and more, like as I get older. Since I recovered from binging, I've never really pushed myself to these limits or anything unhealthy. But the older I get, now that I'm over 40, it just, your body doesn't adapt as well as it used to. And I find that, like I've really had to scale back to make it sustainable and to feel better. Like I feel terrible if I exercise too hard or a little too long. So I think just age, every unique body is different, but I like that you try to help people find that balance for themselves.
Things like age, stress levels, sleep quality, commitments outside of exercise, all these things influence your maximum recoverable volume, essentially. So, we could have two people, we could have identical twins. One of them is getting less sleep and is under more stress than the other. That one's maximum recoverable volume, the amount of exercise that they can do and then positively recover from, won't be as high as the other one. So there are all kinds of variables that will affect our ability to both perform and recover from different volumes and intensities when it comes to exercise.
Yeah, and I think that's also why it's so important not to compare yourself to other people.
Yes. Yeah,
and that's got to be a huge thing you help people with too.
I have conversations about comparisons multiple times, literally every week. It's something that we're always touching on. Comparisons and the habit of comparing yourself constantly to other people, even to younger versions of yourself, is rough.
Yeah, it's such a great point. So we've talked about, some ways people can keep exercise in their lives as a healthy habit. What are some things that people should watch out for as far as, going back down that unhealthy path toward disordered eating and body obsessions?
This is something that actually came up in a conversation I had yesterday. Someone asked, how do you know when you're there? Like, how do you know when you're in a really, really good place? And the best answer that came to mind for me was when your nutrition and fitness practices fit in around your life rather than you making your life fit around your nutrition and exercise practices. So some warning signs that you might be taking a few steps backwards towards disordered eating could be that, if you're noticing like a lack of flexibility in your approach, that can be a sign that things might be tipping in the wrong way. If you're feeling anxious or guilty about missing a workout, and if you notice that you start organizing your life around diet and exercise, like if you're adjusting your work in a big way to accommodate, large volumes of training, if you're maybe turning down social things that you would otherwise really like to be a part of in the name of sticking to a particular diet or sticking to a particular training program. Essentially, when you start to sculpt your life around training and nutrition rather than training and nutrition just complementing your life, those are kind of some signs that the balance might be tipping. But of course, there are, if someone's like a professional athlete and it's part of their career and they're being paid like squillions of dollars to, to be fit enough to play like tennis competitively or NFL or something like that, of course, that's different. Like, we're not talking about professional athletes here or people who have some kind of athletic performance.
Yeah, like where that is their life.
Yeah, where that is their actual life. So aside from those people, these are some really good indicators of whether or not you're in a good place.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I would add too, like, your weight changing and disordered behavior starting to slip back in and, maybe calorie restriction and binging and, those kind of things that we might already think of. But I really like that idea of like your exercise kind of takes over your life. And that's a really big warning sign that you might be going down the wrong path.
Sure, that's it.
Yeah. You mentioned kind of competitive athletes and people whose life is really focused on sport. And there are certain sports where a weight is a factor, and people who are in situations where they do want to compete, they may be wondering, how do I continue to compete in a sport where weight is a factor if like focusing on weight is unhealthy for me? This is kind of a loaded question, but is it possible to focus on weight or maintaining a certain weight, even when you're someone who's susceptible to binging and to disordered eating?
I had a really amazing conversation about this with a professional Thai boxer by the name of Angela Chang. And, that conversation is on my podcast. She's on Instagram. I'd highly recommend that people follow her because she's just a whole lot of good vibes and sensible information surrounding a sport that actually involves, changing weight. Sometimes we need to step away from things for a period of time, but that doesn't mean that something is going to be always off the table for us. Something that I like to say really often is that what we do at the start of any given journey in terms of moving away from disordered eating and anxiety surrounding body image might not be what we're doing or what we're going to be doing at the end of the journey. So there might be some things that need to be done, some boundaries that need to be drawn at the start of the process just to get our head above water. But then when we've been in a secure, safe place for long enough, then we can start working with different variables and seeing how things feel when it comes to maybe making some more intentional food choices or some tactical training choices. So I'd say that a period of time does need to be spent when we're not attempting to change our body size and shape. And that period of time is going to look a bit different for everyone. And that's almost a non-negotiable, that needs to happen. If you found yourself in a difficult place, there will be some period of time where we need to leave your weight alone for a bit. It doesn't mean that you need to, like intentionally put on a whole heap of weight, like, or anything like that. Like it doesn't really work that way, but it's just that we need to remove the focus from weight and shape for long enough to the point where we can feel stable, feel secure again. And then from a slightly more informed approach, we can go, okay, if we want to be involved in certain things, whether it be a sport that involves changing our weight or whatever it might be, let's take a look at it again, knowing what we know, having the experience that we have, and let's see what options are available to us without going down the same path.
Yeah. And I think it also comes back to the uniqueness of each person's journey. Like you mentioned in the beginning, there could be someone who is able to go back into their sport in a healthy way with a completely new perspective and be able to take care of themselves and nourish themselves. And other people may find that, hey, I just need to hang this up for now, for a while, maybe possibly forever, maybe just different personalities, different body types. different temperaments or things like that just makes certain sports not a fit for certain people. And that's okay. There are other things you could do that you could still get joy out of exercise and fitness without having to compete in something that focuses on your weight. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does. Absolutely. I think it comes down to, again, like you mentioned at the very start of this conversation, it comes down to the intention a lot of the time, why we're doing certain things. Like, I've worked with quite a few people in combat sports, and obviously it's an area where people have to manipulate their weight quite often. There's a lot of body image issues in combat sports, and some people, after some reflection, realize that as tough as it might sound, they might be in that sport for the wrong reason.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's because we've done a lot of work in terms of looking at why we're doing the things that we're doing and whether or not we're really intrinsically motivated to do something, or whether we've maybe taken on the beliefs and expectations from other people, or whether it might be because we're trying to prove something. It all comes down to the intention and the reasons why we set out on the journey in the first place. And the reason why we start will greatly influence how we're going to finish.
Yeah, I think that's some really great examples and insights. Kind of go back to my own personal journey with running, and maybe like 10 years ago, I was like, oh, I want to see, I never really made the most of my running career. Let me just see if I can go back to it and like train and see if I can get faster and things like that. And I did it for a little while and definitely never got into any unhealthy spaces, but I was like, why am I doing this? Like, it just never really made me feel good. And, so everyone has to kind of make that decision for themselves as far as their reasons for it. And after that, I just, I jog now, try to train. Yeah. But other people may really love it. I could have got back into it and loved it and it's been successful, but it just wasn't really for me. And that's okay.
There are a couple of things there that you said that I absolutely love. One of them being that when you went back into running, and this is, again, something that I recommend for people a lot, it sounds like you approach that with a vibe of kind of curiosity. Like, I wonder what'll happen if I get back into it, if I do this, if I do that. The difference between approaching a journey involving food and exercise with curiosity, as in, let's see what happens, versus going in there with this preconceived idea of a result that we desperately need to achieve. The difference in those two journeys, and in turn the results, is like night and day. Like, if we go into these kind of things a bit curious, wanting to see what it's like, and we might enjoy it, but we're free to not enjoy it if we don't enjoy it. Like, that's really important. We're more likely going to find something that we can do sustainably, long term, that we're intrinsically motivated to do, if we bring that air of curiosity to the process, rather than any kind of desperation, like, I need to change this, I need to be this. Like, two very different energies we bring to the process. And what you were saying about running just now, I identify with that personally so much. I'm constantly feeling at times like I need to be training myself in combat sports again. I need to be doing something in regards to boxing or Thai boxing or whatever, or maybe Krav Maga, whatever it might be. And then I kind of realized, like, but do I really though? Why? Like, why do I want to go and do that? Like, sometimes I wonder, if I join a gym like that again, will I have a good time? I'm not sure. But then, I don't know, will I enjoy myself more in like an improv comedy class? Probably.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting to hear you talk about your experience. And I think sometimes we develop this identity around sports or whatever we were good at one point in our life. And you feel like, oh, I have to keep doing it because that's who I am. And I have to. And that makes me like, it gives me some sort of purpose. And I do think there is some letting go of that needs to happen, developing different interests. And it's great if you want to keep your sport as a part of your life, however it works for you, but also realize that doesn't make you who you are. And there's so much outside of that you can explore and do. And like you said, maybe it's comedy, maybe it's traveling, maybe it's, many other things besides feeling like you have to do this every day and putting a lot of stress on yourself for it. So yeah, I mean, just have a curious mindset and see what you might like or not like and go from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like even the best in the world can't stay the best in the world forever. Like, even people who are like world champions and they build their entire identity around a specific sport or having a certain level of fitness or whatever, it doesn't mean that we have to let go of our health. Like I keep saying, we can stay active, participate in things that we enjoy and stay physically active and healthy and whatever. But even the people whose entire identity is wrapped in being like a world-class athlete, even those people at some point have to step down from that. So I think it's kind of worth knowing that any kind of identity that's built on like a physical prowess, it's a house built on sand, and there's going to have to be more to it than that.
Wow. That's such a great point. And even if you do decide to continue your sport, also having a life outside of it, I think can set you up for the inevitable time when you will have to let it go.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is all really helpful. I do have one, additional thing to say, and that some sports don't require you to cut weight. Some sports require you to gain weight. And it actually kind of leads me into a little bit of a bigger topic that in our society today, the idea of kind of being thin and back in my eating disorder journey, it was all about being thinner. And of course I was a runner and there was all about losing weight. And now I feel like there's a lot of people trying to put on mass and gain weight, and the ideal body shape, especially for women, has changed from maybe the thinner side to the more curvy. And, you want to build up your body in certain places. And where does this lead us as far as eating disorders? Like, do you feel like this is actually helpful for women and many people not to always be trying to lose weight? Or kind of what are you seeing surrounding this issue?
Yeah, we're talking the strong, not skinny mantra. I think it's difficult because some people are genuinely in a much better place since the strong, not skinny thing became more mainstream. But I wish we could just do away with placing things pertaining to people's bodies on pedestals. Like it's a step in a better direction than like the heroin chic thing, but it's still problematic because frequently people are making it not really about strength, but just like a different look. Like in the same way that fashions come and go every decade, like it's still placing one aesthetic look, that curvier look, on a pedestal, and it's not really encouraging diversity. It's not really encouraging people to go, let's get curious about what the strongest, fittest, healthiest, happiest, most fulfilled version of myself is. Let's get curious about what happens when I find a style of exercise or training that I really enjoy and spend time doing that. It's still, like I said, it's better than just trying to get as lean as possible and as skinny as possible, but it still puts people in this position sometimes when we've got like a preconceived idea of what the aesthetic look should be in terms of a result. And whenever that happens, it reduces the likelihood that we're going to find something that's more uniquely you.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, I see it like you in that it is a step in a better direction because, as we know, the dangers of calorie restriction are many. Depriving your body of food, that's when you really get yourself into trouble. And I like that your podcast is called Strong Not Starving instead of Strong Not Skinny, because it takes sort of that body image piece out of it. You're like, you don't want to starve yourself. Like that is top of the pile, right? So the idea of stronger and more curvy and muscular being sort of the more ideal body type, that helps people not starve themselves, I feel like. So in a way, there's some positives here, but like you, it just places another set of standards that a lot of people can't meet and causes a lot of obsession there. And people are really killing themselves with the weights. And, I don't know, it's a tough issue and we could probably talk about this for a long time, but I appreciate your perspective here.
Yeah, thank you. You're right. It is that step in the right direction. It is better. But when we have a preconceived idea of how we, quote, should look, or when a particular body type or image is placed on a pedestal, that inevitably sets people up to strive for that. And it is really a difficult topic. We could unpack that box for days, but the main point that I would hope everyone would take home is to, get curious about what happens when you create something sustainable for yourself that you enjoy and that you can really get behind and that you're intrinsically motivated to do, rather than doing because you're invested in the result.
It's such a great point and such a great note to end on. All of this has been really helpful. I hope that it helps each of the listeners sort of in their personal journey to figure out how fitness does fit into their recovery and into their life beyond recovery. So I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's always really nice chatting with you.
Thank you for being here for this conversation with Marcus. I'll put a link to his podcast in the show description, as well as a link to his Instagram so that you can learn more. I hope this episode has helped you think about how exercise may fit into your life in a healthy way at this point in your recovery and into the future. As we talked about in the show, a fundamental step before thinking about fitness goals is to get the binge eating under control and to stop the food restriction. If you're still struggling with that, I encourage you to go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe to get more guidance and support. There you can learn about the self-paced Brain Over Binge course, as well as group coaching and one-on-one coaching if you need highly personalized advice and accountability. I'm very grateful that you joined me today, and I hope you'll be back for the next show. Until then, I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.